Okay, hello everyone. I'm going to try to introduce a way using Visual Studio 2010 and XNA to create a 2D tile map for use in games. This is going to be a very simple approach, one I'm going to try to build on later. This is just the building blocks of a 2D game or 2D map. So try to follow along. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments. Okay, so using Visual Studio 2010 here, we already have XNA installed, I should mention as well. We're going to create a new project. So I'm going to click on New Project. I'm going to name it something. I'm going to go ahead and name it 2dTileMap. It is going to be a Windows Game 4.0 project in Visual C#, so I'm going to highlight that, and then I'm going to click OK. Now you'll see it'll create our project, and one of the nice things about C# and XNA is that if we hit the play button to start debugging, we would already have something up on the screen without us having to do anything. The code groundwork is laid for us, which is really nice. I'm not going to go into how that is or why that is. Hopefully you have at least some understanding of XNA and C#. So I'm just going to go over creating the 2D map system, a very basic one. So the first thing we're going to want to do is create a texture 2D type of object, and we're going to name it tile texture. Now this is going to hold our entire texture. There's going to be several blocks or tiles, but they're all going to be in one texture. So this is going to hold all our tiles in one texture. It's good to comment when you can, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. The next thing we're going to create is a dictionary. Okay, so what a dictionary is you provide it with a key, and it'll provide you with the value. You have to fill it out, of course. So what it wants, and you can see right here, is that it wants to know what type of key and what type of value. Okay, so the type of key we want is a string. We're going to provide it with a string value, and we want it to return a rectangle value. The rectangle is going to correspond to the tile in our texture. So just a rectangle out of that texture that we want. Okay, we're going to name it TileRex, short for rectangles, tile rectangles, equals new. Now if you notice here, when I hit space, it tries to fill it out for me automatically. It's kind of a nice thing, a nice setting. You see it thinks you want dictionary string rectangle, which is exactly what we created before. So I'm going to hit tab to fill it out, and then we'll finish off that line. To comment it, the dictionary will return a rectangle from a provided string, and we'll fill out that dictionary when we load and the load method a little bit later. So now we're going to define our tiles. Something that's not going to change. Tile width is going to be 32, and tile height is going to be 32. So it's going to be an even square. 32 is kind of a common thing for a 2D tile game. You could create anything you wanted, 16 by 16, 24 by 24. It's up to you, but I try to stick with 32 to something I've gotten used to. So now we're going to define our 2D arrays. Now these arrays are basically going to be our maps. I've already typed them up previously, so I'm just going to copy them into our program here. You see the background layer, that's going to be behind our character. And you can see here it's a 2D array. You see the comma, so 2D. And it's going to be type int. And these are all numbers, they're all integers, so yeah, these are ints. The next thing we want, oops, did not mean to do that. I'm going to Control Z to undo that. Now the next thing we want is going to be our collision layer. Now our collision layer doesn't necessarily need to show up on the screen as something visual, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's supposed to be used for just whether or not something's passable. 1 being a solid and 0 being not solid, something we can move into. You can see that here. And we will represent that digitally with tiles, but it doesn't technically need to be shown. But we're going to do it for debugging purposes to see how things work. Now our foreground layer, same thing, except this layer is going to be in front of the character when we create the character. We won't be doing the character or the movement in this video. It'll probably be in the next one. Okay, the another thing we're going to define, because these maps are kind of large, is the size of our window. When we first hit the debug or the start button here, it was kind of small, so we want to make sure that it's going to be 1280 by 720 so that we can see this full map. It's kind of a large map. Moving on, we're going to go to our load content. We're going to want to, we defined the tile texture earlier, and now we need to load it. We're going to do that with content dot load. It needs to know what we want to load it with, texture 2D, the same thing we defined it as earlier, the object, and what it's named. Now I named this texture previously. Now I'm going to go ahead and add it, though it's going to be off screen, to my folder so that I can add it into my project. So I'm going to do that now. Let's see here. Now this will take me just a second because I have to move it over. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and move over both the player and the tiles, although we're only going to use one for this tutorial. So now in order to add it, if you see here, I'm going to increase the screen on the right, the Solution Explorer. Here's my content. Alright, now I'm not putting this in any folder except the content folder, and the content folder is defined in the beginning, in the constructor. Content root directory is content. So as long as I'm not putting more folders in the content, I can drop it in the content folder and not have a problem. I did that off screen, so I have to go to add the existing item, and then I tell it I want tiles. So you see the name, tiles, and if you looked at here, we want to load tile. Actually, I need to put an S on the end of tiles. Alright, so that will load the texture. Now I can minimize this a little bit because we don't really need it. More space for our code. Next thing we need to do is we need to fill out that dictionary. That dictionary without anything filled out is pretty useless. So I'm going to go and copy and paste, and then I'm going to explain to you what each of these does. Alright, these creates a rectangle. Now, TileRect is the name of the dictionary, and we want to add items to it. The first part is going to be the key that represents the item. See, string key, which is right here. On the right of that, where we are now, is the rectangle that we want returned. So if I say from the dictionary, I want the key that corresponds to the string of 0, it's going to return me this rectangle. You might notice something odd about this rectangle. It has 0 width and 0 height. That's because the 0, if it's in our 2D array, I don't want to see anything from it. So I'm just going to say, basically it's a bad rectangle. It's going to be nothing, so it's not going to show up. It's just a little trick there. So now for 1, it's going to show up as the rectangle that's at the X position of 32, the Y position of 0, with our width and height. If I put a comment here, you'll be able to see what makes up a rectangle. Integer X, integer Y, width and height. Okay? So 1 will return that. Now let me go and open up our tiles to show you what it looks like. Okay, here it is. So you can see here 0 is nothing. Alright, 1 is going to start at 32. So that's going to be red. 2 is going to be 32 added on to that, so 64 is going to be green. So on and so forth all the way through. Alright, scrolling down, the next thing we can do, and the last thing, is going to draw. Now after we clear the screen with graphics device.clear, that was there before, we're going to say spritebatch.begin. Always close that off with in as good practice, I think, just so you don't forget it. So in between these two is where we're going to do our drawing calls. We're going to have 3 drawing calls, background, collision, and foreground. Again, you don't really need to show collision, but we're going to just to make things easier to see visually. So I'm going to start with the background layer. I'm going to copy and paste. Now what this is going to do is it's going to go through our 2D array, background layer, and it's going to step through it, X and Y. If you see down here on the draw, we're going to use our big texture. Where the next part is where we want it to appear on the screen, which is this is going to be the wrong one. The vector position. It's going to be X of that 2D map times 32 because that's the width of our tile. Y times 32 because that's our tile height. Then the next thing is going to be the source rectangle. This gets off a little bit. There you go. Source rectangle. Now remember that dictionary is for we provide it with the key, it will return the rectangle. That rectangle is what we want. That's what this is, a source rectangle from that larger image. Okay, so now if we break it down, TileRect, the key, which is right here, you see how it says string key, I'm providing it a string by using background layer. Now remember, background layer is made up of integers, if you remember from the top. All these are integers. Okay, so how do we go from integer to a string? Well, all we did was at the very end we put a dot, and you'll see there's a method toString. That's all we did. So it's returning a string That key, we put that into the dictionary returns the rectangle that we want. It's kind of a simple process. Now the one thing to keep in mind that might trip you up, and you might already have noticed it, is that it's a bit reversed, the X and the Y. I'm going to go ahead and change this, as I should have had it earlier. Tile width, since we defined that previously, we don't need to be hand coding that. We made a variable for it. So, but the problem is, you notice here, X and Y, as a normal coordinate, X is first, then Y. But when we get to our background, we reverse it. Why do we do that? The reason is because of the way it's stored. When you look up here visually on a 2D array, if I said this position right here, visually would be X of 0, 1, 2, Y of 0, 1, so it would be 2, 1. Alright? However, the way it's loaded into the array, it's going to be reversed. It would be 1, 2, because the Y is first. So visually, when we're putting on the screen, we want it to be X comma Y, because that's how we see it. But the way it's stored is Y comma X. So if we're trying to pull it from here as a value, the value that's stored, the integer value in that array, we're going to have to reference it as YX. If, however, we want simply the position in the array, which is 2D, we want X comma Y. Just make sure you keep it separate and you won't have a problem. You can see that up here as well. Y is less than get length 0. 0 is the first position in the array. So in other words, in the way background layer, it would look like this. Y comma X. It's going to have a problem with me trying to put an X in. But that's, if we want to pull something from it, that's how we pull from it. Y is first, X is second. That's why it's 0 here for Y and 1 here for X. However, visually, the location as a 2D position is X comma Y. So that's why we draw it this way, but we pull the data that way. Okay, so we have a background layer. I'm going to go and delete that, and I'll just copy and paste collision to foreground because nothing's going to change. I'm going to go and replace these. It's 32. We defined it earlier. I should use a variable rather than hard coding that. So when I hit play, you'll see something on the screen. I'll move it over. There we go. Now let me point out some stuff to you. You see the blue is different from the inside. It's different from the outside. The blue is the background. So is the yellow actually, and I'll show that to you. Look at our background layer up here. 5 is blue. So you see that big panel of blue, and you see 3 here. That's that yellow. Alright. You also notice 1s and 0s. Remember, 0 is not going to show up. 1, you remember what color 1 was? 1 was red. So our collision layer is showing correctly as well. See the red on the outside? So the only thing left is the green in the middle. It's like a backwards T. And that is the foreground layer. So you look at foreground 0, which again is not going to show. And you have your T right there. 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, which is green. So it's correctly showing all the layers the way it should. First the background, then over top that the collision, then over top that the foreground. Collision detection isn't being used, we're just showing it visually. I'll show it one more time. There you go. So that's our 2D map from a 2D array. Remember, the array is referenced Y comma X, but being shown is X comma Y. If you all have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll do my best to answer. Thank you for watching.